Next up on the atrium stage, the Arsenal of Mobility. Please welcome our guests.
So good afternoon, everyone, just barely. Thanks for coming. This is going to be an exciting panel. It's going to be one where we're talking about what I think is the most important theme of this conference, talent, and I couldn't think of a better panelist to have this discussion. So we're going to be jumping into what type of talent do we have here in Detroit, what do we need, and for what we don't have, how are we going to get it? And really, how do we become the Arsenal of Mobility? So what is the Arsenal of Mobility? Why did we title this panel this name? If you think back, pretty far back, to 1940, a year before we entered World War II, you may recall that Franklin Delano Roosevelt held his very famous fireside chat where he talked about, we must become the arsenal of democracy. We must build the armaments that will allow the West to win. And when we think of where we are today in Detroit, we must build the tools, we must build the provisions that are going to allow us to compete and win. And today, those tools, those provisions, those are people. It's talent. And that's what we have to be laser focused on creating. So I want to start by giving the panelists 90 seconds, 2 minutes, take your pick, just to do a little introduction of who you are and why you're here. Jessica.
I'll start. Well, good afternoon. Jessica Robinson, Executive Director of the Michigan Mobility Institute, which was announced yesterday. And I am really excited to be part of a new effort focused specifically on talent for the future of mobility. We'll get into it a little bit later, but as Chris mentioned, one of the things that we've found in recent research with a partnership with BCG is that there is a gap that we need to address to be relevant in the future. And so I'm based here in Detroit, transitioning out of a long-standing relationship with a leading manufacturer in the region, and I'm excited to talk about this today.
Thank you. Allison.
Allison Malik, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of May Mobility. We are a self-driving transportation services startup based here in Michigan. So we do a lot of hiring and searching for that talent, but I also am really passionate about this subject. I've worked in the automotive industry for over a decade for major automakers and understand sort of what's going on that internal shift, having recruited elsewhere, trying to get people to come here, trying to keep people here, so bring a pretty broad perspective.
Thank you, Allison. Glenn.
Hi, I'm Glenn Stevens, and I'm Executive Director of Mich Auto, and I also head up automotive and mobility initiatives for the Detroit Regional Chamber. So my focus and our focus, and I've got Allison by a couple decades in the industry, is really focused on the talent pipeline for Michigan, advancing Michigan as a center for not only the automotive industry, but as a center for next generation mobility, and then also really making sure that we have the right climate for companies to grow here. And of course, that depends on talent. So thanks for having me. It's good to be with all you guys.
And I can't stress enough the amount of background and passion that we have with this panel. This is unique to have all of us, I think, on the stage at one time. So Jessica, I want to start with you. As someone who's been part of groundbreaking organizations for a decade across next generation mobility, why did you take this on now? And what is the Michigan Mobility Institute going to do to really change what talent is in Detroit and across the state?
Yeah. So the Michigan Mobility Institute is actually an initiative of something that Chris and I started last summer called the Detroit Mobility Lab. And it actually started, Allison, in no small part because of you. We have a chance to talk about mobility here in the region frequently, and I got tired of having this conversation about the fact that you cannot hire the people that you need here. And so I left a really exciting position focused on the future of mobility because of the magnitude of this talent gap that we have. And so the Michigan Mobility Institute will be focused, as I mentioned, squarely on mobility talent for the future. One of the things that we announced yesterday is in our findings, we realized that there's actually a need for training in several areas, including the professional trades, reskilling, and helping our workers think about new skills and moving from a single focus in engineering to a broad focus in things like data and AI and systems thinking. We also know that there's a tremendous need for new workers in the skilled trades, so there's a great opportunity there in the Institute. And then the third piece is actually a new advanced degree, which we announced yesterday, called the Master of Mobility. which will actually be a 9 to 12-month program for folks, to get an advanced degree focused on the future of technology.
That's great. And I like that you bring up the relationship between all of us, because we've been talking about this for a long time. And Alice and you and I have had a chance to talk about this in detail over the years. And you have said for many years, we create a lot of talent in this state, but people need to want to be here. And you've also talked about that we need to leverage the fact that Michigan is a great place. Talk a little bit about what you mean and why it is that so many still don't understand or appreciate what Michigan has to offer.
So I think this really stemmed from my experience. I got to recruit at Stanford for a major automaker and managed to get people to move from sunny, most of the year, Palo Alto to Michigan to work in this industry. But it was very much driven by sort of one-on-one conversations about what the opportunity is here in Michigan, not just to work, but to live. Early days, so I do live in Detroit and have for about a decade, and early days of those efforts, I would have to bring candidates. Generally, we'd be taking them to Ann Arbor, which is great, we'd be taking them to Royal Oak, which is great, but I actually started giving like private tours of Detroit to help get candidates excited about coming to Michigan to live. So there's really two parts of things that I think if we want to keep talent and we want to attract new talent, they need to understand it's actually not just about mobility. They need to feel like it's a cool place for them to live, but they also need to see a lot of opportunity. And I think that that's something we'll dig into more in this panel. But for any one person to want to move to a new place, it can't just be about that single job. We will not be able to attract the best talent if they're only coming for the single job that we got them here for. We need them to recognize that there's an opportunity to stay here and grow here, even if it's not with the employer that they hired into, so they can grow their networks and find other opportunities. And that's something that's really stunted in this region right now.
And that point right there around, I think, this is not just about mobility. Obviously, we're all here because we're passionate about this space. But when we're talking about artificial intelligence, robotics, AI, computer science, these are fields that are going to help many different sectors of Michigan, which I think is really important. And you're kind of alluding to the concept that you come back to a lot around the ecosystem. So that's something else I want to come back to as we kind of move forward in the panel. Glenn, over the past few months, I know you've been focused heavily on the talent pipeline. I've been meeting with CEOs around the state, around the city that are laser focused on this. Talk about some of the initiatives that you're personally rolling out right now, and what are you hearing from various stakeholders? What are they saying around what we should be doing, what we're not doing, what they want to do?
Sure. So I think it's important to get the voice of the business community, and we've done that. We do that on an ongoing basis. We convene executives to do that, but we've also asked the students and youth. We've done 2 perception surveys of the industry over the last few years and put real analytics and market research behind what do they think of the industry. I've also spent time as long as 4 or 5 years ago in California and in Europe talking to them about what their perceptions of Detroit are. Because it's all about perceptions and it's all about what the reality is. The reality is the vehicle is the most high-tech consumer product on the face of the earth. And now it's the center of the IoT. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're connecting youth, people from other places, people from other countries, and that's something we're involved in too, to want them to come here and work on a high-tech consumer product that solves global problems, not contributes to them, including safety. And so that's one of our big real focuses, to continue to beat that drum and work on the perception issue.
And then looking at it through the lens of the chamber and from the business community, as you point out, when you're talking with C-level executives, when you're talking with heads of HR, is there an acknowledgement as to just the need to build talent in this state and the fact that we just don't have enough right now?
Well, I mean, everybody knows, and I mean, there's lots of panels and lots of articles about the talent gap. We know that, I mean, it's there. But it's about having the right skills for companies to execute on these technologies that exist today. The internal combustion engine is not going away, but electrification and autonomy and connected and shared, they're here. So that requires a different talent set. And then it comes back to what you were talking about. Look, I'm from the Upper Peninsula. I love the 4 seasons. This is a great place to live, work, and play. One of the things the Chamber has done is put a Let's Detroit platform in place. It's a website where people can connect. It's not about mobility. You can connect on mobility, but it's really about where do I eat, who do I connect, where can I find a mentor, where can I find jobs, where can I live? Not just for the region, but hopefully around the state. That Let's Detroit platform will spread, and we've been working with the MEDC on that.
Can I extend a question? So in our pre-work, catching up with each other. We talked a lot about investment in talent. And I want to dig a little bit deeper into the comment you made about talking with executives and HR departments. There's a recognition that there's a talent gap. Have you seen an interest to invest here to help solve that talent gap broadly? Because we're seeing a lot of press about the industry moving talent from this state to other places where they think they're going to get a better opportunity to develop new technologies.
Well, let's just be real frank. There's a bell curve for companies and how they operate. I do believe the best in the companies that are some of these global players, and even small stamping or injection molding companies in another part of the state, they really understand that the world is changing and that it's all driven by the people they're going to have and the technology they're going to be able to enable. But I think a lot of companies don't get it, and it's all about, well, we're going to deploy wherever we can deploy. But back to us, the work that you're doing, it's dependent upon us, all of us working together to make sure that our pipeline gets filled with that right talent. I've heard executives say, look, we're a global company. We will deploy where we deploy. But if we help them invest in the talent pipeline, the right talent pipeline, then this can be more than what it was 100 years ago. It can be a lot more for the next 100 years.
Yeah, 100%. Allison, any follow up there?
So I think kind of building on the ecosystem that we talked about before, I understand that global companies will make decisions about being able to go wherever the talent is, but I've watched going to where the talent is, hiring the talent, opening up the facility, 5 years later deciding to close down the facility and losing all of that talent. And so I think one of the things that I wanted to be able to talk about more openly with this panel is that the right long-term investment, and is that how executives are thinking about it? If we're going to grow centers of expertise elsewhere, does what happens in Michigan actually matter?
Well, it has to matter, and that's why I think it's important to get the right people. Companies are going to make short-sighted decisions for the short-term profits. That they're going to do that, but we have to find those companies that want to work with us on the long-term basis. Companies like Lear and Magna and a lot of other companies, they're trying to invest in the talent here and grow the technology here, and those are the types of companies we need to hear more from and work with more. It's not easy to invest. It's very easy to go where the talent is. It's really hard to invest and grow your farm system.
Yeah.
But we have to do that.
And in defense of those decisions, and to kind of put, I think, why are people making these decisions? I think we all can understand that companies are going to move to hubs of technology and mobility talent globally. That's a good business move. It makes sense. But I think coming back to Detroit, we can't solve our talent pipeline issue by hiring smart folks from Pittsburgh and Palo Alto and hoping that fills all our gaps, because it won't, because we need to create them here. And so that's something I think that, Jessica, obviously you're running point on, and if we don't have that mentality as we need to take this from a variety of different perspectives, we're not going to be relevant.
And I would add, it's not like we don't have people here, and it's not
we have
like
great
we
people.
don't have people
Yeah.
in these
There's more
companies.
engineers still by concentration here than
Right.
anywhere in the world.
And so I think the challenge that we run into then is, are the companies willing to invest? Is there the will, but is there the training and the right set of programs to help people transition or broaden their horizons so they move from mechanical into robotics and become familiar with computer sciences? And that's one of the things that we heard in doing the background work for the Institute, was that we had that talent, but they're not getting that bridge.
And one of the comments you said, Jessica kind of put out there during her remarks yesterday, you talked about before the automotive industry, there wasn't an automotive engineer. Before the airline industry, there wasn't an aeronautic engineer. We need a new type of engineer, a mobility engineer. So I think to all of our points, we have amazing engineers here in Michigan. We have the most per capita anywhere in the world, but the skills for the next generation of mobility are different. What does that new mobility engineer look like? What are the types of things that we're going to need to train them with? And I'd love you guys to answer this from both the perspective of how the Michigan Mobility Institute is going to accreditate and educate those individuals, and how you in the field, as an entrepreneur, are hiring people and training them at May Mobility.
That's great. So I'll start, and I'll actually mention a conversation I had with someone on Allison's team yesterday. I described these engineers that we have in our companies today. They know one thing. They went to school for a CS degree. Maybe they've been the beneficiary of a leadership program internally. Maybe if they had a great boss, they've been able to broaden their horizons. But really core to all of this is systems thinking. And so how do the various pieces for the future of mobility start to come together? And it turns out in certain areas of engineering within the core business today, there are people that are wired and they're trained to think that way, but they've not been exposed to the new technologies because they're in a vehicle program. And they're on time to deliver in 2021 or 2022, and there is no extracurricular development beyond that. And so as we think again toward the future, being very comfortable with software. AI is going to be part of our lives for the foreseeable future. And in this conversation I had with one of your team members yesterday, he's a vehicle...
He's a
Tell me again.
field autonomy engineer.
A field autonomy engineer, which look up 2 years ago, was anyone posting for a field autonomy engineer? I'm sure the answer was like 5 or 10. And what was fascinating about this young man was he has a background in mechanical engineering, but he now does field deployments out in communities. He does work individually to understand the business flow and the patterns, not exposing all of your secret sauce, but thinking about how this vehicle is actually going to interact, not in a hypothetical environment, but in the communities that you're deploying in. And what struck me was that you had to figure out what was the base level of talent and then put the training around him to make that successful. Because you had to for your own business success. And that's what I'm excited about, is those types of people figuring out where there's the base level of talent and how to evolve it into the next phase.
So specifically with May Mobility, we have had to get creative. I don't think there were any field autonomy engineer positions posted before roughly last year, because I think we came up with, like, to be perfectly honest, it's not an industry standard title. It's one that we were like, what should we call this thing? Our FAEs actually are the ones that travel out into the field. They review routes, they help update our systems, they keep our customers happy, and they are our multi-tool. And they're amazing, but to hire one is really hard. And we'll usually look for somebody that's got a specific area of expertise and exposure to software. So either they're good at software and they kind of understand hardware, or they're good at hardware and they kind of understand software. And we have to take the time to bring them up to speed on the other area of expertise. Because at the end of the day, we're in sort of the next evolution of the industry. I actually worked in electrical systems starting in 2008. So it was like pretty well past when, electrical systems were an important part of the vehicle. But OEMs were still trying to figure out how to deal with that system. And now when we go to the new type of systems thinking, it's not just input, output, and like, do you need 12 volt and like what kind of communication bus are you on? We're in a whole new world where you need to be able to understand the physical implications as well as the software implications at a much higher level than we've had to before. And that level of expertise, it's like you get these like hyperly important people within the engineering organization that all of a sudden become like the technical expert. But that level of broad-based capability is not a focus of the industry today. We have become highly specialized because that was a really efficient way to bend metal and push out cars. And we need to like totally change that paradigm. We haven't even really been able to do it around electrical systems, so we need to pour gas on that fire.
If you want to see it, if you haven't seen the cut in half Ford Explorer Hybrid in the Ford booth, just stand there and look at the technology in that vehicle, and including the metal and what they've done to take weight out of the vehicle. But the battery and the engine and the sensors, I mean, it's right there and cut in half for you to see. It really gives you a perspective of the type, and then you can translate that and say, okay, wow, we need a lot of talent to be able to bring these things to market.
And two quick observations. One, Allison says, I don't think this title is industry standard because we came up with it. Allison is setting the industry standard. New firms today in mobility around the world are setting what the industry standard is going to be. And so the standards of the past are no longer going to be how we think about what we need and how we're going to be educating people in this space. And two, the job specs that you're looking for and that you're training for, those specs have to drive how we create talent. It has to be a very multi-dimensional tinkerer rather than someone who's very siloed within one aspect of engineering. And that's going to be really important. Glenn, I want to segue really quickly. We talked a little bit about your advocacy, especially with your Mich Auto and the Chamber, but you've also done this for young Michiganders. And I know Jessica and I spent a lot of time thinking about that post-bachelor's, master's degree is going to be the biggest bang for our buck. You're looking at a private sector entity to do amazing services for cities and make create a tremendous amount of value. You have the benefit, I think, of kind of looking at that whole chain and saying we're also going to make sure elementary, middle school, high school, that's something that's very important. What are some initiatives you're working on there that we should be aware of that's going to engage the state and it's going to be a part of making sure that everyone around the state can be a part of what's happening in Detroit?
Well, we've got programs in place to talk to engineering and supply chain and business and IT folks at the university, community college, and high school level right now. We're actually doubling down on the high school area right now. In fact, Jessica's been to Oakland U to speak to students. We really believe that we got to change perceptions at an even younger age. And so we're really focused on 4th and 5th graders and really getting them enthused about and excited about the fact that these vehicles, these May Mobility vehicles, or these Ford or GM vehicles, these are very, very high-tech products. Sure. These are high-tech companies. You'll see auto companies referring to themselves as tech companies now. It's because they are, right? And so changing these perceptions, or even really more importantly, getting to them younger and crafting those perceptions. And again, we have a wonderful place to live, work, and play. And we have to make sure that the kids that grow up here, or the people that move here, or the veterans that come back into the workforce, or the immigrants that want to come here, that there are opportunities for them and that they know that this is an industry that is high-tech, global, and growth, because it is. And so we're really, really focused on really working on the branding and the awareness of the industry at an even younger level.
No, that's fantastic.
Can I actually add something to that? So you're absolutely right to call out changing perceptions at a younger age and the work that you're doing. I mean, I love coming out and talking to the kids, so please continue to have me do that. But the other perception that I increasingly am shocked to learn, that we have to change is the perception of the parents. In starting to have these conversations publicly now, already in the past 24 hours, 2 parents have come up and said, this is great, love what you're doing, we have to invest in this industry, but I'm going to tell my kids to go find a great career elsewhere. And it blows
No,
my
you're on
mind.
it. The market research that we did proved that out. It wasn't the students that were we weren't high on their list as a career opportunity. We showed that. But when it came to influencers, teachers, parents, and counselors, we found that they were actually a negative influencer. Now it's changed a little bit in the last couple of years since we did that, but there's still a gap. And I get that. I mean, I understand, particularly when we're going through what we're going through right now, when there are job cuts and plant closings, nobody wants to hear about that. But look, we have to look at things differently. We've said for many, many decades, we have to diversify away from automotive. I would argue that the best diversification platform we have is automotive. When you look at robotics and cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, that's in our industry now. Why shouldn't we build our industry here? But it depends on having the talent to do it here.
I think it gets back to, as well, to the ecosystem discussion that we were having. I can imagine a lot of my old colleagues encouraging their children not to take a job in the automotive industry because it's like this hidden truth that everybody says isn't a truth about the fact that if you work at an OEM, you could then go work at a supplier, which will actually appreciate that you understand the OEM process, and then maybe you go to another OEM. And all of a sudden, we have this knowledge base that is made better because everyone is here. Like we all, oh, well, you worked at Ford as opposed to GM, it's not as good or something like that. But that's actually a fallacy. And one of the benefits of being here is you can hop around and you can get expertise and exposure, and that lifts every OEM, every tier 1 up. But it's like this nasty truth that nobody wants to talk about. If we actually expose that as a value, we can then look at how do we use these areas of expertise for other industries that are really growing in Michigan, like healthcare. As we look at even agriculture, like how do we look at cybersecurity as it impacts multiple industries that are also growing here? But right now we're so siloed even within companies that we can't have that dialogue. And if we could change that reality, there's a bit of perception there, but there is some reality there of openness and career opportunity and growth. I think we could change a lot of parents' minds, but I'll tell you right now, it is hard. If you want to be an innovator and stay in this state, it's hard. It's actually hard. You have to want to do it. And we need to get to a point where you don't have to want it. It has to be natural.
Hidden truths right here on this stage. It's the only place you'll find them. So I want to actually pull that string that you just got to go after right there. And I want you to start with this, Allison, if you don't mind, but then I want everyone to chime in, because I think this is something we discussed, and everyone was very passionate about it. Allison, you're no wallflower. It's one of the reasons I like you so much. During one of our recent conversations, you said two things that really grabbed me. A truth that the industry fails to accept is we must look at this region as a regional talent pool, especially in CS, computer science, and IT. And we all need talent, and we also rather need talent in services. We need business talent as well. All the computer talent and software talent in the world will only achieve in making us Foxconn. Talk about what we're doing wrong. What are we doing wrong in this region? Those of us on stage, those of us in this room, how do we solve this, either through systemic engagement or just through perceptions? But dive into that.
So that was a two-parter. What was
Take
the first?
either part.
All right, so the second part was a comment that I made. I've worked in engineering organizations and helped recruit in engineering organizations, both from inside the state and outside the state, and it's tough, and we kind of know what we need to do on the technical side. We know that we need to create these new types of degrees, we need to do retraining, we need to make sure that the perception changes. We know we'll get the engineers there. It's going to be a long road, it's not going to be easy, but it's sort of a known set of unknowns. When it comes to creating value, the value is moving away from the vehicle as a sales transaction and towards the experience of being moved from point A to point B. When we look at the skill sets around IT even, around how to grow businesses, that is entirely different.
Yep.
I had to hire customer success people because for me, I need my customers to want to pay me every month. I'm not selling them a car and then hoping that they're happy with it and it doesn't come back from a quality or warranty perspective. I have a relationship with them every month where they get to sign up and say, I want to keep doing this. What you provide to me is valuable enough to keep doing this. And I'm extremely fortunate that we brought on our VP of Customer Success, who had experience in the Bay. So I actually imported that talent. That type of capability and skill set is not core to how the automotive industry operates today. It's core to other industries, but if we don't start to bring those types of skill sets here and grow that capability here, we really are going to do a great job building the mobility hardware of the future with really low margins. And someone else is going to be able to grow the services and that customer experience on top of it. And that's okay if that's what we want, but if we're talking about being a mobility hub, then we need to be honest about what is the business of mobility. And it is not manufacturing vehicles. It's about an ongoing relationship with the people and things that you're moving. And how do we change our perceptions and even how we track nitty-gritty things like financials. It shouldn't matter how much it costs to put more compute into your infotainment system at launch. It shouldn't matter. But every design release engineer has to fight for that quarter of cost up to try to future-proof the car. The thing that should matter is what capability does that give us to grow along with the relationship with the person that we're moving. And until we can move the industry in that direction and grow more of that talent here, we're still going to be struggling with what business do we actually want to be in.
And this is so important. This is the difference between 2% margins in pressing metal and 40 to 50% margins in providing services. And all the benefit that comes to those companies, to their employees, and the derivative opportunities through higher margins for companies that we want in this region. It's such an important point. Please.
Well, you asked what are we doing wrong. Let me I'll take a little bit bigger picture, and it's a little bit cliche. I think we need to stop expecting things to stay the same way and be the same way, because the world doesn't work that way.
Right.
And we've done that. That's why we were such a victim of these inflection points over our history. We have to, one of my favorite books is Andy Grove, Only the Paranoid Survive. I love this book. If you haven't read it, read it. He talks about, it's got to be about a cultural mindset. You've got to behave differently to take the upward turn on the inflection point. And if you don't, chances are you're going to take the downward turn, but you can't stay the same. The world's moving too fast us around us, and so is transportation.
Jessica, any thoughts?
As we have this conversation, I'm reflecting on the will to change, and the conviction that we have to do this. And you know, I'm actually thinking about, given the title of the discussion here, after World War II, Stanford actually almost shut down its aeronautical engineering program because they said, no more World War. We don't need flying aircraft in the same way. And the guys who were alumni who worked at Lockheed and everywhere else said, do not stop the aeronautical engineering program. And they came in a big way and invested. And we're not there yet as an industry. And so that's what I am hopeful for, is that we recognize that this is do or die time for us. And it's not enough to say, well, we're working on our retraining programs and we're going to upskill in a few years. The time is now.
There's 17 OEMs here in our area. A lot of people think there's 5 or 6, there's 17. But there won't be 18 or 19 unless we do things differently. And that means having the right talent so those companies expand. Right now, yes, they're working on electrification and mobility solutions, but they're working on today's industry. All right, as this industry evolves, if these companies can't work on what's the future's going to need, they're going to do it in other places. And that is a huge, huge risk to Detroit in this region. I don't want to be around to see when those companies start making those decisions to start pulling up stakes and going, you know what, I'm going to move not just this engineering center on in this part of my vehicle, the whole thing.
And for me personally, I don't mind if there's not another 1 or 2 or 3 OEMs here. What I want is the OEMs that are here to be worth 4, 5, 6, 10 times more than they are now. I want them to have the ability to grow what they do and the people they employ and the impact on our region. And I think, again, that all comes back to talent. But that question of will. So let's talk about that for a little bit. Because for me, we all acknowledge what the problem is. We all acknowledge the type of men and women that we want desperately to be in this region so we can hire them. We all are very clear. When you look at the quarterly and annual reports from our C-level executives, when you look at the reports from a regional economic perspective, everyone's like, this is what we have to do. We're not doing it. We're not doing it to the extent that we need to. And going back to the theme of this panel, in 1940, there was just a movement across the entire country to say we must do this together or we will not win. What is it going to take in this region for us to lock arms and say we are going to have our Manhattan Project for Mobility? We are going to have, we're all in a way in which isn't hedged. And I just throw that open to the...
It has to matter the where. Because right now, you do see little departments getting moved out. May Mobility has benefited from the fact that Daimler and Bosch moved all of their development work to California. And there were engineers that didn't want to move, and we scooped them up because that's great talent, and that's part of being in an ecosystem. But those moves are starting to happen. You have Daimler and Bosch going to California. You have GM with Cruise. The same week that GM announced that they were going to be shuttering plants and laying off workers here, Cruise announced that they were going to open up a new engineering facility in Seattle. You also have Argo doing a lot of hiring in Pittsburgh. And as we talk about will, I think we have to lay all the cards out on the table. I have not seen too many moves that demonstrate will. I think Ford's move with the train station and actually focusing their business team in Detroit showed an incredible amount of will, because it wasn't just move them from HQ, it was move the people that need to provide urban services into the type of environment that they will serve. Like, that was actually more forward thinking than I think people give it credit for. But on the whole, I have not seen a lot of will. And that, I think, is why I was really excited when you invited me. When Chris invited me, I said, are you sure you want me on this panel? Because I think I'm going to say a lot of confrontational things.
And I said, absolutely.
Because that's, like, we talk about it at a high level, but actions speak louder than words, and the actions are saying it doesn't matter.
I'll add to that. In the conversations that I've had, Ultimately, this has to become a board level priority.
Absolutely.
For the manufacturers and tier ones. It's a board level priority for you, but I think so many times in our big organizations, it becomes, well, that's the head of HR. Maybe if we're progressive, we call them chief people officer, something like that. Until it becomes a board level priority, I'm not convinced we have the will. But that being said, we have to. There is no choice.
I want to make one case for why it should be here, and something that nobody talks about, except for May Mobility, because I'm super proud. Our hardware engineers and our software engineers sit together, because that is the only way to develop a safe and reliable system. Anybody thinks that you can like stick a bunch of software engineers out on the coast and like cross your fingers that they're going to be able to fill out the DFMEA appropriately with its interactions of which sensor didn't report this on which piece of hardware, it has lost their minds and doesn't fundamentally understand the nature of this work. It is hard. You have to be working with your partners. And that is actually why I think there's a huge case for Michigan, but I think enough people have not gotten actually deep enough into what it means, and this is more specific to autonomous vehicles, but haven't gotten far enough along in the engineering process for that to hit them across the face yet. I have a lot of friends who are engineers, and it's hitting some people across the face at an operational level, but it has not yet gotten to the point of pain where it moves up to the board, but it is coming. The only way to get past this hype cycle and PR cycle of AV is going to be to get those people back together. And most of those people are actually here.
Spot on.
And to pick up on your point, it has to be a board level, but it has to be a top level leadership. Yeah. We did a lot. Under Governor Snyder, we did a lot, and the state moved forward. I'm frankly optimistic with the new administration. Governor Whitmer actually reached out to us a couple of years ago to understand the mobility transformation. So I know that she gets it and her team gets it, but if her administration and our legislators and our business leaders don't make this a priority, which they're doing, by the way, on the education side, which has got to be synonymous with this, we are absolutely not going to make this. So it's got to be from the very top that there's a commitment, because we've seen it in other states.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you look at Tennessee not that long ago. Look at Tennessee now and some of the innovative things they're doing now, or Massachusetts. It's got to be a top-level driven commitment, this issue we're talking about.
And that point, I think, is really important because we didn't talk about it enough. It's got to be la-di-da-di everybody. It's got to be the public and the private sector. It's got to be our corporate leaders and our governmental leaders that are saying, we're going to come together to have a plan. And that plan will change, but we're going to create amazing talent for mobility here, and we're going to do it right now. And so that's something I don't think we see enough of, and we need to see more of. And I'm very hopeful with this administration, and frankly with this discussion, and the way in which this show has kind of bubbled this up to the fore, that we can get there very fast.
Well, and I think too, Chris, we have to acknowledge hard times are coming globally, in the state, and for this industry. And you're starting to see hard business decisions being made about what's the right size of a workforce. And being global footprint, recognize that those decisions have to be made. But why I think it's so important at that board level is when those hard times start to come and people start to feel jittery, the leaders at the C level need to have the confidence that their board is behind them, that they will continue to invest in talent during the hard time so that they are triply fit when we come out of the next swing.
And one thing I'm just going to say one last piece on that piece. It's spot on. Where are we putting our dollars during the hard times? It has to be in these people. It has to be in our talent. It has to be in HR. This isn't a nice to have. This isn't a potential incremental spend. We must focus on the talent and the leadership of the future. And if we don't do that during the good times, but especially during the bad, when we come out of that downturn and we get to that next boom cycle, who's in charge and who has the hand on the tiller and what are they selling? And is there anything to sell? I think that's such an important point.
And I think there are actually great positive points looking at the last downturn. 08, 09, 2010, there was a lot of investment on how to retrain workers to be able to work on electrification technologies. I did a master's degree at the University of Michigan with a lot of GM colleagues that had worked there for a long time and had expertise elsewhere, but were really excited to rethink their career. And it was really informative to me to get to do that at the same time of watching their experiences come to bear. That worked.
Yeah.
That worked really in a fundamental way where you still see a ton of battery investment, electric machine investment and development here in the state. And so I think, pulling from that playbook, we've got a lot of talent. We developed a ton out of that during the downturn, during bankruptcies. So I do feel confident that we can do it, but it's got to be a high-level decision.
And we're talking about doing it on a state level. I mean, we could spend another 45 minutes talking about the cabals of Ann Arbor and Detroit, and why next year, and why we should be working much closer together. And we need to. We can't think of it as kind of silos. We're in this together, 100%. So I want to give each of you an opportunity to kind of end with a final thought. It can be on anything we discussed. It can be a call to arms. But Glenn, why don't you start?
Well, I'll listen more than I'll say anything right now because I have a lot of respect for these two and what they've done and what they're doing, and I give you a lot of credit for taking that leap because somebody had to do it and you're doing it. So thank you. There's a sense of urgency, but you can't be, again back to that book, you can't be obsessed with what everybody else is doing. You've got to leverage your strengths, and you have to build off of them. And we do have strengths. And look at this. This show is not going to look like it does today. Right? I mean, it's evolving too, and they know that. I'd like to see the universities and the community colleges and the students up here out front next year.
Yep.
I mean, come to First Robotics and see what they're doing.
Yep.
I mean, you want your mind to be blown. Come to First Robotics, and I give consumers and Patty Poppy and her team a lot of energy and a lot of credit for doing what they're doing. But hopefully, we're going to be doing more and more of that. And if we do those things, then we get a fighting chance.
I think to build on what Glenn said, as much as I, raise the flag of things are not right, pulling on the thread of what we do have, we know how to build safe and reliable hardware that lasts a long time. That is a competitive advantage that it would take decades, and has taken decades because people are catching up globally, but takes decades to be able to capture. We need to grab that, and we need to make sure that everyone understands how important that gets directly tied to the new technology that's in development, because then it becomes abundantly clear why you want to keep people here, why you want to take advantage of the existing ecosystem of expertise that is here, and how we can grow it. But we have to be really clear about what we're good at and what we're not good at. And I'm really excited to continue to grow May Mobility in this region because there is a ton of talent. It's like our hidden secret right now. And I'm okay with other people kind of catching on to that.
That's great. So I'll end where I ended yesterday, which is a question, which is, what are you going to do today after you leave this conversation? And it's a simple ask, which is have one conversation with one other person in this building today about the importance of talent. And if you do that, you have amplified this conversation 100-fold, 150-fold. And that is the only way we're really going to have people start to see how important this issue is.
100%. Well, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to end with everyone, except maybe you guys. Again, looking at the image behind me, we can become the great arsenal of mobility. We can provide the tools in the form of the very best mobility talent in the world when they graduate from the Michigan Mobility Institute, when they join and learn at amazing companies like May Mobility, when they're able to engage with the many opportunities that Glenn's putting forward with Mich Auto. Detroit and Michigan will be victorious, and we will empower our city and state if we take the steps we know we need to take to create the mobility talent infrastructure we will require to compete and win. But as Jessica said, and I love that you took the words out of my mouth, we have to move now. There's no time to lose. Let's move to win together. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.